Let's start off now with the speech outline. This is how you're going to translate the card that you have, the information that you've written down to put in your binder. It's how you translate this information into the outline of an actual speech, into an outline that you can put on your note card and use when you get into your speech. The first part's going to be the introduction. Now, every speech starts with an introduction, so this is probably pretty common sense to most of you. You should always start your martial speech with an introduction. The introduction is where you draw your audience in and introduce your topic. It serves two different functions. You first say, A, here's what I'm talking about, here's the theme I'm talking about, and here's kind of what I'm going to be talking about through the course of this speech. And B, you draw their interest. You make sure that they want to keep listening to the end of their speech. I will tell you guys this from my experience. If a judge doesn't want to listen to your speech, they won't. They just will stop listening, they'll look, they'll try to make some notes like they're paying attention. But whether they realize it or not, they've subconsciously stopped paying attention if you do not draw their interest in. That doesn't make sense. If you do not draw their interest to begin your speech. One of the best ways to start to see your ballots go up is to have a captivating introduction for you. Your introduction might take a different form to somebody else's. A lot of people use personal stories in Mars Hill. That's just not my style. I don't really care about my stories. So I'm just like, okay, so I got in an argument with my sister once. Cool, like whatever. Some people, that's the way they see the world. They can understand things. They can say, oh, it's kind of like that time I had a fight with my sister. That kind of makes sense to me. They can work through their mind. That's not how my brain works. So that's not the introductions that I would usually use. For some people, it might work like that. So figure out what works for you. Figure out what you care about, what you find to be captivating and compelling. Find those super bluntly, blatantly honest people in your life that will tell you if you're being boring. And tell them, hey, would this be a captivating introduction? And if they're like, no, that's awful, then move on to something else. But if the super honest people are like, well, that could be okay, then you know you got something. So try to find those people that can tell you what a captivating introduction is going to be. Make sure you clearly state the topic, theme, and your roadmap, but don't be formulaic. Clearly state what you're going to give the speech on. That's the first thing. Yeah, and I can see you shaking your head because that second part makes no sense, right?
Oh, every time I was one below a check mark in 4 tournaments, all of it was for not being conversational.
Yep. I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. The struggle for those of us, yeah, it's real, okay? Yeah, make sure you clearly state what your topic is. A judge should not get halfway through your first point and then figure out what you're giving your speech on. A judge should be able to tell right away in your introduction, oh, they're giving a speech on XYZ. They should also be able to tell that pretty early in your introduction, so the rest of your introduction could serve to introduce that topic. Remember, part of the purpose of an introduction is to introduce your topic, so don't save it until right at the end to say it. Say it more at the beginning, so judges can start to orient their minds to it. Also, make sure you state your theme. Make sure you state what you're going to be talking about. So if you say, I actually usually state the theme before I get to the topic. Like I'll have my intro. I'll say, Martin Luther King, I have a dream, yada, yada, yada. He had a dream, motivated people because they believed in his cause. This power of belief is something that we can see in this topic. So I'll have the theme, and then I'll say, look, this is what we can see in this. So there you go. There's the theme and the topic clearly stated. You don't have to do it exactly like that. Just make sure the theme and the topic are pretty close to each other and make sense together. Thirdly, you want to bring up your roadmap, but there is going to be a caveat on this. Your roadmap, a lot of people in Mars Hill will say, is not conversational. And that makes some sense to you because, you don't go up in a conversation and be like, hey, what'd you think about that movie? Well, I'm going to tell you 3 things today. I'm going to talk about what the movie was about. I'm going to tell you what the message of that movie was and what my opinion is on it. No, you wouldn't do that. Well, you might do that, and then they'd walk away, and you'd be like sitting on the sidewalk alone, and then it would start raining, and then sad music would start playing from out of nowhere, and that just wouldn't be good. Don't do that. What you want to do, though, is give a judge some indication of where you are going to go. One thing that I will usually do is I'll just formulate that into a sentence. A very casual, informal sentence for me. It's not casual and formal for most people, but it's as casual and informal as I get when I'm giving a speech. Where I'll basically just say, we're going to see this theme expressed through what this book is about, what it's trying to communicate to us, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit how we can analyze that from an external worldview. That's just something that I like to have. Some judges will still say, hey, that's not conversational enough, but that will usually be a good balance. Part of the problem, just throwing this out here before we get any further, part of the problem with Mars Hill is different judges look for vastly different things. So some judges will say, well, it's supposed to be conversational, but you should still have a roadmap. And if you don't have a roadmap, you fail. And some judges will say, if you have any form of roadmap, you fail. Those are two diametrically opposed things. Those are two mutually exclusive things. You cannot make everyone happy. You just have to find the thing that makes the most amount of people happy. And finding some informal roadmap like that usually does that. People who are looking for a roadmap say, okay, he has some indication of where he's going. He's also trying to be conversational. While the people who don't want a roadmap or are trying to be super conversational say, oh, he's just trying to give some people a roadmap, but he's trying to be conversational and formal while he's doing it. People won't be like super, like it won't be perfect. You won't knock it out of the park every time. But for the most part, there's going to be a balance that you're going to have to find. Finally, establish credibility, but also focus on being relatable and personable. Establish your credibility first of all. I want to talk about this because there is an emphasis in Mars Hill for some reason that your intro means you have to show how you are a stupid person. That's not true. A lot of people have personal intros about how they've made all these mistakes and stuff like that. You can do that if you want to, if it's a great story. I know I have plenty of those stories. But you also want to establish your credibility. So if your story destroys your credibility by making you seem just like a teenage kid that's standing up giving a speech talking about their past, then don't bring it up. Your credibility is one of the most important parts of your speech. Your credibility is one of the greatest things. Now, you can demonstrate credibility by saying, hey, look, I struggle with this too, so I know where you're coming from. I've made my own mistakes in this area, but don't have that be the first impression of the judge. So tell a judge something that you have learned. If you do talk about mistakes, don't just say, oh, I made this mistake and it was awful. Say, I made this mistake and I learned this really important lesson because of that. Make sure no matter what you do, you establish your credibility. I can't tell you, I've heard probably 7 Mars Hill speeches in competition over the last 2 years. Probably 5 of them, I would say, sabotage their credibility in the first 25 seconds of the speech. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Don't be that guy. Be somebody who has credibility that people still believe is an authority on something, but also, and this is for talking like to people like me, probably Samuel, you struggle with this too. I know the feels, man. Make sure you're relatable and personal as well. Make sure people are like, oh, there's a person up there talking, not just some moving mouth thing. Make sure you relate to them. Make sure you say, look, I've seen this. This is my observation. This is the way I see the world. Or as you're going through your speech, even as you transition into your points, think, look, this is something that I've thought about over the last several weeks, or this is something that I have confidence about, or I've had some sort of insight about. Make sure that you don't make the speech about you, but make sure the judge knows that you are giving this speech. Don't let the judge get lost in the speech without looking and understanding that your heart is behind it. That you, who you are, your moral essence, your virtue, however you want to phrase it, whatever works for you, is behind that speech, is putting that speech forward, and is trying to make that speech something that they will listen to. A lot of judges, if you aren't relatable or personable, will just judge your speech like they're words. Like they're just words on a page. You can have great rhetoric, sure, but they won't have an emotion behind it unless you connect with them somehow. That connection is something that's different for everyone again. I'll talk about that a little bit more under delivery, but make sure you both establish your credibility and establish your relatability and personability. Personability? Is that a word? I don't know, but it is now.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool. The second thing, now points, this is going to be a little confusing, so I'm just going to clarify this now. Points 2, 3, and 4 are going to be about points 1, 2, and 3. So just bear with me. Do a little y equals x minus 1 thing. Never mind. Okay, so your first point is going to be the synopsis. The first point's where you're going to explain what a certain topic is about. This first point serves to merely teach the audience about the topic. In essence, what you're doing is you are standing up like you would explain something to somebody who you kind of wanted to go see the movie. So you'd say, oh, look, this movie, if you're one of those awful people that give spoilers when you recommend movies, try to be an awful spoiler person. Don't try to be a cool person that recommends movies. Be somebody who says, look, here's what this is about, here's the progression of this movie, here's the main character, here's the hero, here's his adversary, here's his obstacle, what keeps him from getting to his goal, here's his final confrontation, the apparent defeat that he has, and the resolution of the conflict between the two people. So move them through what the topic is about, teach them what the topic is about. Just stand up and say, look, here's what's going on, here's the facts, and I'm not going to put any spin on it. That's really important. Under this point, you'll cover your short synopsis and give a summary of the plot or lyrics. This is where you'll write down your short synopsis on your card. I'll talk in a second about how you can format your card, how I format my cards for Mars Hill. But you start off by writing down that short synopsis. You write down those few words that you have to summarize the plot, and then you'll explain them a little bit, go into a little bit of detail to give a comprehensive summary of what's going on. One really important disclaimer with this, don't take a position in this point, just explain. You are not trying to make an argument or any form of judgment about the topic in the first point. In fact, you want to avoid that like the plague, and here's why. You're going to have 3, maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe if you're really good at the event, 9 judges that are going to be judging you. I guarantee you there is going to be a mix of some people who like that topic and some people who do not like that topic. But all of those people are going to have some indication, maybe, of what that topic is about. The reason why you give this first synopsis point without having any judgment either way is so that a judge will say, okay, this is the topic, he's not contradicting my standpoint yet, so I understand that he's actually coming at this from a perspective of analyzing what the topic is, not just giving his opinion about it. If I stood up and I was giving a speech on The Dark Knight Rises, alright, which I probably wouldn't do, but let's say that I was inspired, I had some form of clarity, and I just wanted to try it. Let's say my synopsis was like, this is a totally awesome movie where Batman's like doing awesome stuff and Bane's like really awful. All this bad stuff happens, but Batman becomes the true hero that we all love. I just love this movie. It's just the greatest movie. If somebody's sitting there and they hate The Dark Knight Rises, they're going to be like, really? Like, stop talking already. I don't care. Or if you're like, well, The Dark Knight Rises, I mean, it's kind of okay. I almost fell asleep while I was watching it, but I mean, I understand, like, I don't really understand why people like it, but this is about, like, Batman, who's some vigilante billionaire guy who has way too much money, and all this stuff that he's doing, and there's this bad guy that I'm pretty sure was the good guy most of the movie, but I could be confused. A person who likes the movie is going to automatically be alienated by that. So be very careful with the way that you give this synopsis, that you are not giving any sort of judgment either way. Have you all kind of heard the ideal news report where it's like somebody's literally just giving you the facts without any spin whatsoever? Where it's just like, this happened in Iraq. And that's it. Like, no spin. It's just the facts. That's what you want to do. You want to give the facts with no spin. You want to be a trustworthy news source when you're giving this first point. You just want to talk about what a topic is about without making a judgment on it. You'll do plenty of judgment later. This point should be about a minute long. It shouldn't be that expansive. You should be done with about 2 minutes of your speech once you get to the end of this first point. About a minute for your intro, about a minute for this first point. What that means is you have about 4 minutes for your last 2 points and your conclusion. But definitely, this synopsis is very important. It's important that a judge knows what a topic is. I've heard some speeches where people have just ignored the synopsis part. They haven't talked about what the topic is. They've gone straight into judgment. Those speeches usually fall flat on their faces because they do not give the judge a background before you get to talking about the rest of it. It's kind of like for those of you who are TPers, you know, like you have background information before you have your harms. Background information is to teach the judge about something before you get down into the judgment claims. I'm sure LDers have something like that too. My brain's just not working. Okay, but the synopsis point's really important. Make sure you spend enough time explaining the plot. Your point 2 is going to be exploring the theme. This is where you're going to talk about the theme. This is where you're going to pull out the theme and explain what the theme is and how the theme manifests itself throughout the book or the movie, throughout the topic. The second point is where you will illustrate the theme or the message of this topic. It's where you'll talk about what the film is trying to communicate, what it's trying to tell the people that are in its audience. This is where you'll really go into that first part of the comparison and the contrast between Christian worldview or Christian themes and the topic and the theme of the topic. You have to first demonstrate what that theme of the topic might be. You'll include the 3 parts of the theme and any other author background. Remember, we were talking yesterday, when you have your card, when you have the information there, you have the 3 parts of your worldview, or the 3 parts of your theme, the 3 points that you're going to have, the 3 things you're going to talk about, and you might have some author background or some director background to kind of give some inspiration into what the topic is really about. It's under this second point that you'll demonstrate this. You'll talk about this. You'll talk about, oh, here are the 3 things that this movie, let's say, is trying to communicate. Here are the 3 things that are happening here. And here's the director's background that lets us know that this is a common sense interpretation. This sounds like something that this director would be willing to do, would do because of his background and because of what has happened to him. You'll explain all of that here in the theme. You'll conclude this point with your bridge and use it to transition into the third point. Your bridge is going to fit in at the end of this second point. In essence, you're going to say, look, here are the 3 parts of the theme. Here are the 3 things that are happening of the theme in this topic. This is similar to the first half of my bridge. This is similar to this part that's just missing this one little piece. For instance, I'll talk about Unbroken again. In that he has overwhelming obstacles, he believes that he can overcome them, and therefore he saves himself or something like that. I forget exactly what my 3 parts were, but those might have been my 3 things. So I would have talked about those, and then I would have said, look, this is very similar to Friedrich Nietzsche's belief of the power of will, the power of each individual person's will to overcome the obstacles that might face him. So I would transition from that into that first part of the bridge, the secular, the topic side of the bridge, and explain that. And then I'll use that bridge to transition into my third point, to say, look, but there's this missing piece. There's this small missing thing that might happen if we just institute it. And this is where you get to the point 3, the Christian worldview. Your third point should build off your bridge and complete the transition of the topic to Christianity. Think about it like this. You're starting to build your bridge from this side, and then once you get to your third point, you build your bridge out to the middle to meet where you just were. You transition with the bridge from that second point about the topic theme into the third point about the Christian worldview. So your bridge isn't necessarily contained in a point 2 or point 3. Your bridge is explained to link point 2 and point 3 together. What this means is that those 2 will be really strong together. They'll be really strongly linked, and a lot of judges are looking for that. They're looking for a strong comparison or contrast between the themes of the topic and the themes of a Christian worldview. They're looking for that bridge to be built. If you tie the 2 points together with your bridge, it's going to make it really, really effective. Make sure this section is focused. Don't just talk about the gospel. When you're talking about the Christian worldview, make sure you're talking about it in the same context as whatever topic theme you have. So if I'm talking about the power of belief, I'm going to talk in my Christian worldview about how important it is for us to believe in God, for us to believe in our salvation. Now that takes the form of a gospel message, but the only reason that takes the form of a gospel message is because it's the same concept. It's about how important it is for us to believe, for me as a Christian to have that power of belief in my life, and how powerful that belief that I have truly is. However, if you're giving a speech on something like racial equality, let's say for instance, your Christian worldview section is going to be about how our identity is found in Christ. How our identity is not found in flesh and blood, how it's not found in the way we look, the way we talk, the things that we do. It's found in our identity, our purpose in Christ. Now that doesn't necessarily take the form of a gospel message because it's the same concept as the one explored in the topic theme. Make sure that those two things are the same. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to talk here about how important it is that we have good family and gospel, because that's not how Mars Hill was intended. Mars Hill was intended to make sure that you are comparing two things and the same unit of measurement. Think of it kind of like units of measurement. Think of it the topic theme. This analogy just like fell apart in my head, so I'm going to try to save it. Don't have your topic theme be in yards and your Christian worldview be in meters. Don't be that kind of person. Make sure you're talking about the same unit of measurement. Make sure you're both dealing in yards, you're both dealing in meters. You're both dealing with the power of belief, you're both dealing with racial equality, you're both dealing with a struggle for identity, you're both dealing with a struggle for purpose. Make sure that both of those things are the same and that they are tied together. Show why a Christian worldview is unique. This is really important. One of the things that sets you apart in Mars Hill is if you can show why a Christian worldview, how a Christian worldview sets itself apart from the theme of your topic. How it has, again, just that one final piece, that one final step to get to the top. Think of it kind of like you're trying to build a stairway to heaven, but you're missing 3 steps. You need to fill in those top 3 steps to be able to show, look, here's why Christianity is unique. Christianity is the only stairway to heaven that doesn't leave you plummeting back down to earth, landing in a car that's on the highway to hell. So make sure that you show why a Christian worldview is unique, because that's the only way that you're going to be effective in the way you communicate. I'm really proud of that. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's talk about your conclusion now. There are a few things that are unique to Mars Hill in how you format your conclusion, and the way that you format, or in the way that you structure what you're trying to do in your conclusion. First of all, though, your conclusion should mirror the introduction and wrap up the conversation. So you want to kind of mirror what you did. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was wondering, how long do you spend on the Christian worldview section of your speech?
Well, that one's funny because it kind of depends on how excited I get about my bridge. I'll usually try to spend 2 minutes. I'll usually try to spend 1 minute on the intro, 1 minute on the first point, 2 minutes on the second point, 2 minutes on the third point. Or no, that's not how it works. Like a minute 15, a minute 30 on the third point, and then the rest of my time on the conclusion. Sometimes it's okay if your Christian worldview spills over into your conclusion, as long as it still accomplishes what we're going to talk about. So if you need to have a little bit more time for your second point, then you can maybe have 2.5, 3 minutes, and then just spend the rest of your time on kind of a mix between the third point and your conclusion. If that makes sense. But make sure that if you are going to blend your third point and your conclusion, that your third point, in a sense, accomplishes these tasks. That it mirrors the introduction and wraps up the conversation. Remember, what you're trying to do in an intro is you're trying to introduce the topic, and you're trying to look forward to what's going to happen, and you're also trying to draw interest or create interest. And in conclusion, you want to keep that interest, you want to keep that compellingness, that compelling aspect to it. You want to look back at what you've talked about, and you also want to wrap up the conversation. You want to kind of conclude what you were saying. Put it together and tie a pretty bow on it. Make sure that everything is cohesive. In other words, you want to put a second bookend at the end. If you have those bookend things that like have the... Another analogy that's falling apart. If you have the bookend things that, I don't know, we have the... I'm just going to stop talking. Okay. Let's move to the second one. Just think of it kind of like bookends. You need to have the intro and the conclusion on both sides. Otherwise, all the books fall over to one side and it's really not very effective. Okay. Make sure you remind a judge of the theme and the Christian worldview. Make sure you remind a judge of what the heck you're talking about your whole speech. Remember, the theme is the focus of what you're trying to give your speech on. Make sure you remind a judge of what that theme is, because sometimes they might forget. Even if you say, look, Judge, my theme today, you can tag as the power of belief. Again, the power of belief. Judges are going to get to the end of your speech and they're going to be like, what was it? The power of sacrifice. That's what it was. And they're like, no. So make sure you remind a judge what you can do. Here's a good... Did I go back? Yeah. Here's what I like to think about. Obviously, speech is a subjective event, which means that sometimes stuff's going to go wrong. Sometimes you're going to get a ballot and you're going to be like, are you kidding me? I did that. What are you talking about? I remember like my first year, I would like, don't be me, I like ripped up a couple ballots because I was so frustrated. I was like, come on, like I did that. I distinctly remember doing that. As I started to grow and mature through my speech career a little bit because it was necessary, I started to realize that some of the things that people, some of those confusion points, some of those things were like, well, I did this, but people didn't do that, was just because you did not ensure that there was little to no reasonable doubt. One of the things that you can do to make sure to cut down on those crazy judge comments is by doing everything you can, committing yourself in every way to trying to avoid them, to trying to do everything you can to satisfy those concerns. If somebody is going to say to me, oh, I don't know what your theme was, that shouldn't be because of anything I did. I need to put everything out on the table myself. If a judge does not understand something I said, it is my fault because I did not make it clear enough. Make sure that you do not give a judge the opportunity, do not allow the judge the ground to give you a bad ballot. Do what you can to make sure that they walk out of that room and know exactly what your theme was because you reminded them of it like 7 times. Be like, Judge, I talked a little bit earlier about how the power of belief is really important. We've traced this power of belief throughout our speech, and we've traced the power of belief through the top. Don't do that. But basically what I'm trying to say is don't leave anything behind. Do your best, put everything you have into the speech. If a judge still does not appreciate it, then that was just probably stylistic. I have gotten so many less weird comments on ballots since I've started interpreting them in that way, interpreting them in that context, saying, look, they're thinking that because I did not make this clear enough. They're thinking that because regardless, I said it. I totally said that. I wrote that down on my note card. Absolutely, I said that explicitly, but I did not make it clear enough. Always take responsibility for everything that happens because when you are communicating, the message you communicate, you are accountable for, you are responsible for. If somebody does not receive that communication, that is not their fault, that is your fault. You did not broadcast the signal strong enough for them to be able to receive. I don't know how that stuff works, so I don't know if that makes sense. But make sure that you take accountability, make sure you try to step up and ensure that what you're saying is being communicated to a judge. That attitudinally and stylistically is, I think, one of the most important things I learned in my entire career. It's just how to interpret that and say, I need to do better. I need to push myself to explain more, to be more clear, so there is absolutely no doubt in the judge's mind exactly what I meant by this. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to mention that the ballots are changing again. I think they used to do it this way, Julia, where they would have the 1, 2, 3, rather than doing a check mark, a plus or a minus.
Okay.
So that might help, for a judge. If we think you said it might have been clear, we might give you a 2. That way you know maybe to scooch it up to a 3. So that kind of, I don't know if that will help.
Okay, cool. Yeah, definitely, like, swallow your ballots whole. I know I talked about this a little bit last year. We had like a ballot interpretation section or whatever. But make sure that every time you get your ballots, you don't literally tear them apart. I mean, figuratively, tear them apart. Take every single bit of information you can on how to grow. Learn how to do new things with the ballots, like Mrs. Clausen was talking about. Learn how to interpret what the ballots are going to look like, what kind of feedback you're going to get. Take feedback as a way to clarify and make sure that you are actually communicating what you think you are. If you humble yourself and dedicate yourself to your ballots, you will grow a lot more than you could like ever think of. The first half of the year, I did better than I ever did in the rest of my career, and people were like, "Oh, you must be practicing a lot." And really, up until about ICC, like the 2 weeks before ICC, I didn't really practice my speeches that much. I didn't really practice debate. What I did do was I took ballots and I tore them apart and I said, look, this is what I need to work on. Here's an itemized list of the 17 different comments that I got on this event on my ballots. So let's think about how I can integrate that into what I'm trying to talk about. If you humble yourself and take the feedback on the ballots, you're going to grow even if you don't practice as much. If you do both, practice and digest ballots, then you're going to be really good. So do both because that's awesome. Okay. Finally, the one thing that separates a Marshall conclusion from other conclusions is leave them with questions to provoke an ongoing discussion. Remember we talked yesterday about how this is on the ballot. How it is on the ballot that you have to provoke an ongoing discussion with the judge. So make sure that you leave them with some form of question. Say, look, we've talked about the power of belief, but ask yourself, what do you believe in your life? If you make a personal question, a glaring question like that, a judge, even if they don't want to answer it, is going to subconsciously think through the answer of it. They're going to say, yeah, what do I believe? What do I believe on this thing? I mean, humans are all philosophers. We all make formed conclusion about things, whether we actively think about it or not. Our minds are constantly processing that information to reach a conclusion. If you ask those questions, it will be, have any of you guys heard the phrase like a stone in the shoe of somebody? Like you put a stone in somebody's shoe and then they walk around and they're like, oh, there's a stone in my shoe. Oh, there's a stone in my shoe. Oh, there's a stone in my shoe. Or you go tubing on the Salt River and it's, oh, there's a whole sandbar of sand in my shoe. Basically, you want to do that. You want to leave them walking out of that room with just a little bit of an annoyance, a little bit of an irritation that they're going to have to keep going back to. If you want to think about it another way, give them a little bit of a mosquito bite so it kind of itches for the next few days. So they're just thinking about it, scratching it. If you want to be mean like that, then if you are a ruthless, savage person, then think about it like that. But yeah, just leave them with something small that they can think through, something small they can consider, and make sure that it's provoking an ongoing conversation.